Hi, I'm Delara. My sister told the court I was practically homeless. My son looked at me like he didn't know who I was, and just seconds later, the judge called me, Your Honor. That's when Monica's face turned ghost white. They didn't just lie about me, they stole my home, my name, my silence. But what they didn't see coming was that I still had one document that could bring everything crashing down. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from today? Drop it in the comments below. Now, let me take you back to the day it all began. I could hear her voice before I even saw her face. She's practically homeless. It landed like a punch. Monica didn't say it quietly. No, she said it as if she'd been rehearsing that exact line in front of a mirror for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. The courtroom shifted. I felt it in the air, the whispering, the eyebrows lifting, the small gasp from someone in the gallery. But none of that compared to what I saw when I turned to look at my son, Rhett. His eyes scanned the room like he was trying to figure out if this was real, if I was the mother he thought he knew, or the wreck Monica just painted me out to be. His shoulders sagged under the weight of uncertainty. I couldn't even look at her. Not yet. Instead, I reached inside my coat pocket, my fingers finding the worn edges of a handkerchief, white, soft cotton, the letter D embroidered in blue thread, my father's steady hands in every stitch. It had been his last gift to me before the cancer took him. He used to say, "Keep your name clean, Delara. When everything else is taken, that's what you've still got." And now, here I was, with my name being dragged through the mud by my own blood. I slowly rose, keeping my posture composed, even as every muscle in my body screamed. Not in pain. No. In betrayal. The judge hadn't even entered yet. Monica had made sure to toss her jab in while the courtroom was still settling. When she knew the gallery was full and the tension high, she sat like royalty at the witness stand, chin lifted, nails perfect, voice calm and confident. Her designer suit hugged her figure like it belonged on a magazine cover. She glanced at her attorney, who nodded approvingly. The performance was going just as they'd planned. "She has no stable address," Monica continued, louder this time, as if that somehow made her right. "No full-time employment. Your Honor, my nephew deserves better." I blinked hard, willing my heart not to race. Monica knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just trying to win. She wanted to humiliate me, strip away everything I had left. What she didn't say, what no one said, was that the reason I didn't have a home was because I left the house that she had poisoned with control. The reason I didn't have a traditional job was because I'd given up my legal career for 10 years to care for our mother when she wouldn't lift a damn finger. I didn't need a resume. I needed a moment to breathe. But in court, truth has a way of getting twisted into weaponry. I finally let myself glance at her. She smiled. That kind of smile you give someone you've already buried. And just when I thought this day couldn't unravel further, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The air changed. People stood. And then he entered. Chief Justice Harold Keene. I had interned under him, years ago, back when I still believed the law was something sacred. He walked in slowly, nodding to the clerk, then to the attorneys. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. "Good afternoon," he said, in that deep, deliberate voice everyone in Cook County knew. But then, he added something no one expected. "Good afternoon, Your Honor." Dead silence. No one moved. No one spoke. I felt Monica's stare before I saw it. She turned her head slowly, the blood draining from her face as she realized she hadn't just dragged a woman into court, she'd dragged a judge. Me. The gallery broke into murmurs. Chief Justice Keene lifted a hand gently, settling the room again. But I didn't hear the murmurs. I didn't hear my lawyer whisper something at my side. I didn't hear the creak of the old courtroom benches or the rustling of paper. All I heard was the echo of that one phrase. "Good afternoon, Your Honor." And in that frozen silence, I realized, for the first time, this fight would not be about love, but survival. Survival meant I had to unearth every buried truth my family never wanted exposed. But that night, walking into my apartment, all I could feel was the weight of everything I'd just absorbed. The door creaked the way it always did, and the stale scent of reheated dinners and unopened mail hit me before I could drop my keys. I didn't bother turning on the lights right away. I just stood there, in the dark, letting my back rest against the door, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the faint ticking of the old wall clock. The courtroom had been brutal, but this was worse. This was home. And she was right. It did look like we were barely hanging on. Half-packed boxes sat by the wall, stacked under a dented metal shelf. A duffel bag Rhett hadn't fully unpacked after our last move lay open in the hallway. Bills fanned out like poker cards on the kitchen table, unopened, unpaid, and each one whispering that Monica might have had a point. But here's what she didn't say in court. I wasn't some negligent mother running from responsibility. I was running from her, from the house that used to belong to our parents, the same one she managed after the will was read, the same one she refused to co-sign over after Mom died, claiming she was just protecting the family's best interest. Yeah, right. I finally switched on the lamp. The yellow light made everything look tired. Rhett's jacket hung on the back of the couch, and on the coffee table sat the ceramic bowl he made in 7th grade. It was chipped at the rim. Still, I couldn't throw it out. I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. My hand reached for the handkerchief again. The D was starting to fray at the edges. I folded it tightly, letting the motion steady my breath. I thought I was alone, until I heard footsteps from down the hall. Rhett stood in the doorway, his hair still messy from earlier, his sweatshirt too thin for the weather outside. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me like he didn't know whether to ask or pretend like nothing happened. He finally sat across from me and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Mom, is it true? Are we really almost homeless?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I knew too well. "We're not homeless," I said quietly. "We're surviving. There's a difference." He blinked slowly. "So that's a yes?" "It's not a yes," I said, sharper than I meant. "It's more complicated than that." He nodded, like he'd expected as much, but I could see it behind his eyes. He was scared. Scared that everything his aunt said might be true. Scared that I wasn't who he thought I was. "Why would she lie like that?" he asked. I gave a half smile, bitter. "Because Monica doesn't lie the way most people do. She tells the truth, just the parts that make her look good." He looked down. "Is that why you stopped talking to her?" I sighed. I stopped talking to her when I realized she didn't see me as her sister anymore. She saw me as her burden. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "She called me once, a couple months ago, said if I ever needed anything, I could come stay with her." I clenched the handkerchief in my palm. "Did you think about it?" "Maybe," he admitted. "I mean, her house is nice. Her life looks easier." I nodded slowly. "It looks that way." Another long pause. Then I stood up, walked over to the small cabinet by the window, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a box, plain, taped shut with brittle masking tape. I hadn't opened it in years. "What's that?" Rhett asked. "Receipts," I said. "Memories, mistakes. Depends on how you look at it." I pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges. It had been addressed to my mother, postmarked over 20 years ago. Inside was a letter and a deed. Back then, Monica offered to take care of managing the transfer of one of our family's rental properties after our dad died. I was fresh out of law school, too distracted with finals and grieving to read the fine print. She said she'd handle it. I believed her. And here it was, proof that she'd taken full ownership. Not temporary management, not a trust for both of us. She'd signed herself as sole heir. I held the paper up to the lamp, rereading it like it might have changed over the years. That letter wasn't just a memory, I said quietly, more to myself than to Rhett. It was proof Monica had been sharpening her knives for decades. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the lines of that letter glowed like embers behind my lids. I kept hearing Monica's voice in court, smooth, self-righteous, venom wrapped in velvet. And that one moment in the hallway years ago where she leaned in close and whispered, "One day, you'll be glad you stayed behind. Loyalty doesn't go unrewarded." Turns out, she just forgot to mention the reward would be betrayal. By 6 a.m, I was dressed, caffeine surging through my veins and nudging Rhett awake. He groaned from the couch, where he'd fallen asleep half covered in a blanket. "We're going downtown," I said, tossing him a hoodie. "Public records." He blinked at me, groggy and irritated. "Why? It's Saturday." I didn't answer. I just looked at him until he grabbed the hoodie and followed. The train ride was mostly silent. Rhett had his headphones in. I didn't push conversation. My mind was already 10 blocks ahead, imagining rows of filing cabinets, the hum of fluorescent lights, and a clerk trying to brush me off. By the time we arrived, the lobby of the building was still waking up. The front desk clerk looked like he was halfway through his second donut, uninterested in anything beyond his coffee. I stepped forward. "I need access to property transfer records for the Greenfield estate, 2003 through 2007. He peered over his glasses. "Name on the file?" "Monica Bennett, or possibly Delara Bennett." He started typing, fingers slow and methodical. Then he frowned. "I'm showing the file exists, but it's flagged." "Flagged?" "Restricted access. That's uncommon. Usually means the owner filed a privacy order." I let out a short, dry laugh. "Of course she did." Rhett glanced at me, confused. I leaned in. "I'm a licensed attorney. Expired status, yes, but I still have a bar number. You want it?" He hesitated, then shrugged and slid a clipboard toward me. "Fill this out. Might take a while." We waited 35 minutes. I paced the floor. Rhett sat quietly, watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. Finally, the clerk returned, a manila folder in hand. "I'm not supposed to give this out," he muttered, placing it on the desk. "But technically, you didn't ask for sealed documents, just the transfer logs." I nodded once. "I understand." We took the file to the back corner table. I opened it slowly, page by page, and there it was, a notarized document dated November 2004. A transfer of ownership of the Greenfield estate, our childhood home, signed entirely over to Monica. No co-beneficiaries, no mention of me, just her and a signature from our mother, shaky and faint. I stared at it for a long time. "She did this while I was living there," I whispered. "While I was bathing Mom, cooking, cleaning, skipping job interviews to drive her to chemo appointments." "Monica came in once a week, always with flowers and wine, always for show." Rhett leaned over. "This can't be legal. She got power of attorney signed before Mom's health really declined. She knew what she was doing." "And you never said anything?" That stung more than I expected. "I didn't know. Not until now." He leaned back, jaw tightening. "So while you were struggling to keep us afloat, she was living in a 3-story house that should have been half yours?" "Yes." He slammed his palm on the table. Not loud, but enough to draw a glance from the clerk. "So, all these years, she's been stealing from us?" My throat tightened. "I don't know if she sees it that way." "I don't care how she sees it." His voice cracked. "Why didn't you fight her? Why didn't you do something?" There it was. The question I'd been asking myself for years. But in his voice, it landed differently. "I thought I was protecting you," I said, softer now.
"I didn't want to drag you into a war you didn't understand."
He stood up, pacing now.
"You think I understand any of this now? I don't even know who you are right now."
"I'm your mother." He shook his head.
"You're the woman who let Monica win, who let her rewrite everything while you stayed quiet."
I didn't answer, because maybe he was right. For the first time, Rhett looked at me not as his mother, but as the woman who let Monica win for too long. He didn't say it aloud, but the weight of his eyes pressed on me, full of disappointment, frustration, maybe even disgust. I turned away, not because I was ashamed, but because I couldn't afford to shatter in front of him, not tonight. The rain had started while we were still in the records office, and by the time we walked through our apartment door, it was falling in heavy sheets against the windows. That sound, soft, steady, unrelenting, used to soothe me. Tonight, it felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something I couldn't yet name. Rhett threw his backpack onto the couch and began pacing like he had somewhere to go but couldn't get there. I stood in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, because that's what I'd always done when life felt like too much. Find something small to control. He turned to me, his voice hard.
"Why didn't you fight her back then?"
I stirred my tea slowly, letting the silence stretch before answering.
"Because I thought keeping peace was better than burning bridges." He laughed, bitter. "Peace? She robbed us, Mom. And you just stood there."
My hand trembled as I set the spoon down.
"I stood there because if I hadn't, we would have lost Mom even sooner. She was already sick. Watching her daughters fight would have broken her." "That's not an excuse," he snapped. "It's a lie you told yourself to sleep better."
I didn't answer. I couldn't, because part of me knew he was right. Maybe I had chosen silence not just for Mom's sake, but for mine. Silence didn't ask me to be brave. It didn't ask me to expose everything we swept under the rug. The phone rang, jarring us both. I glanced at the screen. Monica. I let it ring once, twice, and picked up. "Well," her voice oozed through the line, smooth as whiskey and twice as poisonous. "Still digging, Delara." "You never learn." I didn't bother with greetings.
"You went too far, Monica."
She laughed. "Oh, honey, this isn't far. This is a light breeze. You haven't seen the storm. You think threatening me will keep me quiet?" She exhaled sharply. "Not you. Him, Rhett. He's a smart boy. Be a shame if he got dragged into something messy because his mother didn't know when to shut her mouth." The room went silent around me. I could hear Rhett breathing heavily from the living room, still pacing. I lowered my voice. "If you even breathe near him..." "What, Delara? You'll finally grow a spine?" I didn't scream, didn't curse. I held the phone tighter until my knuckles turned white. "He's just a kid," I said slowly. "Don't use him." "I'm not using him. I'm warning you. Stay in your lane." She hung up. For a long while, I just stood there, the dial tone humming in my ear. My mind wasn't racing, it was sharpening. For the first time, I wasn't panicking. I was planning. I walked back into the living room, picked up my bag, and pulled open the side pocket where I kept it tucked away. The old handkerchief. The D my father stitched by hand was still there, though the thread had faded. "She doesn't know," I whispered, "that I'm not that woman anymore." Rhett watched me closely. He didn't say anything, but his brows furrowed like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd never noticed before. I folded the handkerchief and placed it in my coat pocket. Not because I needed a keepsake, but because I needed a reminder. The thunder rolled in the distance, and the rain came harder now, but I felt steadier than I had in years. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing for war. Sleep never came. Even with the rain easing into a soft hush against the windows, my thoughts refused to quiet. I kept hearing Monica's voice, taunting, daring, cold. Her words curled around me like smoke in a locked room. By the time morning light crept through the curtains, I'd already showered, dressed, and made coffee I couldn't drink. The apartment was still. Rhett hadn't come out of his room, and I didn't blame him. Last night carved something raw between us. I tucked the handkerchief into my blazer pocket, then slipped out the door. The walk to the office was colder than expected. Autumn in Chicago was never gentle, but today it felt personal. I kept my coat zipped high and my head down, rehearsing what I would say if I changed my mind, if I chose not to fight. The office was quiet when I arrived, just how I liked it. Ellen was already at her desk, her reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose, sorting through envelopes like they were riddles. I nodded, gave a faint "morning," and made a beeline to my desk. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the black screen of the monitor. My own eyes looked unfamiliar. Tired, yes, but something else. Something firmer. Still, doubt crept in. I opened the drawer and stared at the motion I had started writing days ago, before the courtroom, before the phone call. My fingers hovered over it. Was I really ready to go up against her? Rough night? Ellen's voice came gentle, but not pitying. She'd seen people come undone in this building more times than I could count. I looked up, managing a dry laugh. Something like that. She walked over and placed a cup of tea beside me. Not coffee, tea. She never missed small things. Want to talk? I shook my head, then paused. It's my sister. She's not who I thought she was. Ellen pulled up a chair without asking. They never are. I looked at her, surprised. She smiled, thin but knowing. My brother took our father's pension, told everyone he'd keep it safe, bought a boat instead, said I was crazy for asking questions, haven't spoken in 15 years. My throat tightened. Why didn't you say anything before? She shrugged. Didn't seem like you were ready to hear it. There was something powerful in that quiet truth. The way pain recognizes pain. Not loudly, but deeply. I whispered, She wants to bury me. Ellen leaned forward. Then don't let her dig the grave. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Rhett. I answered quickly. Hey. She's saying you stole from Grandma, he cut in. People at school are repeating it like it's fact. One of my teachers even asked if everything was okay at home. I sat up straighter. Rhett, I'm so sorry. He didn't let me finish. Do you even care what she's doing to us? Or are you too scared to fight back? I care, I said, my voice breaking. I care too much. That's why I've stayed silent all these years. The line went quiet. I didn't want to ruin what little peace we had left, I continued. But I see now that silence isn't peace. It's a cage. I ended the call and stared at the papers on my desk. Then I picked up my pen. Line by line, I rewrote the motion. Clear, direct. Not a single word wasted. I wasn't just challenging Monica's forged deeds. I was reclaiming the voice I buried beneath her shadow for far too long. When I was done, I folded the pages neatly, slipped them into a manila envelope, and stood. Ellen didn't say anything, just gave me a nod, the kind that says, "It's time." As I walked out of the office and into the cool morning air, I tucked the handkerchief deeper into my pocket, my name stitched in fading thread, my father's final message, I mattered. By the time I set the papers down on the clerk's desk, I knew there was no turning back. The hallway outside courtroom 502 was thick with voices and footsteps echoing off marble, but none of it reached me. I stood still, holding the stamped motion in my hand like it was both a weapon and a shield. By the time I set the papers down on the clerk's desk, I knew there was no turning back. I didn't even have time to gather my breath before Monica appeared. She didn't storm down the corridor. No, she glided, like always, heels tapping in precise, confident rhythm. Her tailored coat barely shifted as she walked, and when she stopped in front of me, her lips curled into a smile that had no warmth. "Well," she said, voice smooth as polished stone, "you really filed it." I held her gaze. "Yes." She leaned in slightly. "You're going to regret this." There was no anger in her tone, just calculation. Like a chess player who'd already seen the board 10 moves ahead. I didn't flinch. But inside, I felt something shift. Not fear. Not quite. More like a realization. She had no intention of settling this like family. The courtroom session resumed an hour later. I sat at the petitioner's side, papers spread in front of me. Monica's attorney, a man with slick hair and a voice sharp as a knife, rose and dropped a file onto the judge's desk. "New evidence, Your Honor," he announced. "Documents suggesting Miss Delara Cole falsified financial records regarding the property in dispute." The judge lifted an eyebrow, flipping through the pages. Whispers immediately started in the gallery. Even I heard someone mutter fraud. The word landed on me like cold water. I glanced at Monica. She didn't look at me. She was too busy pretending to be shocked. The judge tapped his gavel gently. "We'll take a recess to examine the material." I couldn't breathe. Not because of the accusation, but because of the way Rhett looked at me just then. He leaned in. "Is it true?" His voice cracked slightly. "Did you really do what they're saying?" My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, how Monica had manipulated paperwork, used her money to seal documents, twisted facts. But all I could do was stare at him, frozen in the silence between us. I had spent 15 years protecting him from the ugliest parts of this family, and now he was seeing them, and maybe me, for the first time. "I never lied to you," I whispered. He looked away. That was worse than shouting. That was worse than disbelief. Back at my table, I reached for the handkerchief in my coat pocket, the one with the stitched D my father had given me before he passed. I didn't cry. I folded it in half, and then again, pressing the seams until the cotton creased under my thumb. A habit. A ritual. A small act of defiance I learned long ago. If I couldn't scream, I'd fold. If I couldn't speak, I'd breathe. If I couldn't fight yet, I'd wait. I whispered, so quiet only I could hear it. "Not yet." "I'll wait for the right strike." The judge returned. His eyes scanned both parties. "Due to the nature of these new documents, we will postpone formal hearing until they are verified." Of course, that's what Monica wanted. Delay, distract, destroy. We stood to leave. As I stepped out of the courtroom, Monica passed close behind me. She didn't say a word, but I felt the shift in the air. She knew she'd landed a blow, but I wasn't the same woman she used to manipulate over family dinners. I wasn't the little sister waiting for approval. Rhett trailed behind, quiet, and I walked ahead of them, both. When the gavel struck that day, I realized Monica wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to erase me. That thought sat with me the whole ride home. I didn't bother turning on the radio. The rain had started just after sunset, and it tapped steadily against the roof of the car, matching the ache behind my eyes. By the time I reached my apartment, everything felt heavier. My coat, my keys, even my breath. I walked inside, tossed my bag on the chair, and collapsed into the sofa like the strings holding me up had snapped. I didn't turn on the lights. Letting the dim blue glow from the street lamp outside filter through the blinds felt more appropriate somehow. Safer. The silence inside felt louder than the courtroom had. I could still hear Monica's attorney hurling those false allegations, still see Rhett's eyes, uncertain, almost disappointed. I whispered, "Maybe it's time to stop fighting." And for a few minutes, I believed it.
Not because I thought she'd won, but because I couldn't remember what it felt like to win anything at all. Then I saw it. My purse had spilled slightly from where I'd dropped it, and poking out was the folded handkerchief, the one Dad gave me years ago. Still perfectly creased, the way I had folded it that morning in court. I reached over, pulled it free, and sat up straighter. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing the corners, tracing the stitched D with my fingertip. That tiny motion, quiet, deliberate, was something I'd done 1,000 times. But tonight, it didn't feel like habit. It felt like ritual, like I was anchoring myself to something that hadn't yet been taken. There was a knock at the door. I didn't move at first. Most people knew better than to show up unannounced at this hour. Another knock, quieter this time. When I opened the door, I saw Sam standing there, an old family friend, one of the few who hadn't taken sides when things with Monica started unraveling. His face was streaked with rain, and his coat looked 2 sizes too big, probably his son's. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said gently. I shook my head and let him in. He stood awkwardly for a moment, holding a thick envelope in his hands. "I was cleaning out some boxes after Mom passed," he said. "You know, stuff from the old neighborhood, and I came across this. Figured you'd want to see it before anyone else." He handed it to me. My hands trembled as I peeled the flap back and pulled out a yellowed legal document. At first glance, it looked like more of the same junk Monica had been shuffling for years. But then I saw the heading, Trustee Assignment, Cole Family Estate. And below that, my name, clear as day, dated and notarized. Before Monica had even moved back from Arizona. My breath caught in my chest. "She must have missed it," I said quietly, flipping to the signature page. "She combed through everything, but she missed this." Sam gave a small nod. "I figured she wouldn't want that getting out." Behind us, I heard the creak of the hallway floor. Rhett had been standing just out of view. His hair was a mess, and his face was hard to read. Tired, guarded, but not angry. "So maybe you're not crazy after all," he said. It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it was the first time in days he'd spoken without venom. I didn't respond, just smiled, not at his words, but at the fact that he'd said anything at all. Sam excused himself not long after, mumbling something about early mornings and overdue taxes. I walked him to the door, thanked him twice, and locked it behind him. Then I turned back to Rhett, who was still lingering in the living room. "I don't blame you," I said, "for asking questions. I should have answered more of them years ago." He shrugged, looking down. "I just want to know the truth, Mom. Not half of it." "Then you will," I said, and I meant it. He disappeared back into his room a few minutes later. And I sat down again, this time with the trustee document in my lap. My hands were steady now, my thoughts clearer than they'd been in weeks. I wasn't going to confront Monica, not yet. I'd let her think I was still reeling, still unsure. Meanwhile, I'd gather what she'd missed, connect the pieces, and wait until her house of lies couldn't hold itself up anymore. I folded the handkerchief again and slipped it back into my purse. For the first time in years, I had more than just my pain. I had a weapon. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent most of the night sitting at my kitchen table, the trustee document laid out like a relic, my eyes drifting back and forth between it and the folded handkerchief tucked beside my coffee cup. I didn't need to rehearse anything. I just needed the quiet before the storm. By 7:45 a.m., I was walking through the revolving doors of the downtown courthouse. The air was colder than usual, and the city felt grayer, even for Chicago. Inside, the hallway buzzed with low murmurs, shoes tapping against tile, lawyers tugging files from worn leather briefcases. My heels echoed louder than I expected, or maybe I was just more aware. In my left pocket, I carried the handkerchief. In my right hand, the original trust document, Monica's oversight. My fingers stayed closed tight around it, not trembling this time, not hiding. As I stepped into the courtroom, Monica was already seated, perfectly composed in her designer jacket and subtle pearls.
She glanced up, offered me a smile that was more sneer than anything else. I didn't return it. I sat down at the plaintiff's table and felt Rhett's eyes on me from the gallery behind. He didn't smile, didn't frown either. Just watched. That was fine. Watching was better than walking away. The clerk called the room to order, and the Chief Justice entered with the kind of presence that made people sit straighter. As soon as the pleasantries ended, Monica's attorney rose. "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce additional evidence this morning," he announced. Here it came. With a flourish, he laid down a stack of documents claiming to show inconsistencies in my financial filings, entries forged to suggest that I had been quietly siphoning funds from the estate for years, the same lie, now dressed in new clothes, still filthy underneath. Gasps echoed from the gallery, a few heads turned. I saw one juror mouth the word, "Wow." Monica looked at me then, slow, smug, predatory. Rhett dropped his gaze to the floor. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Cole, do you have anything to counter this submission?" I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted her to feel, for just one more second, like she'd won. I reached into my folder and slid the old document across the table to the clerk. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "This is the original trust agreement signed by our late father and notarized. It names me, Delara Cole, as the sole trustee of the estate, effective immediately upon his passing. This predates every document my sister has presented." A hush fell so complete, you could hear the overhead lights humming. Monica's smile slipped, slow and unwilling, her hand clenched into a fist on the table. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "This has been verified?" he asked. "It was buried in storage, witnessed, filed, stamped. She missed it." The clerk passed the document to the judge. His brow furrowed as he scanned it. Monica stood abruptly. "That's fake," she snapped. "She's desperate. She'll do anything. This whole thing is a setup." The judge looked at her calmly. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Cole." But Monica wasn't finished. She reached into her briefcase and slapped down a folder, rattling the microphones. "This," she said, "is a secondary trust, updated, signed, and legally binding. And this one names me as the rightful trustee." I saw the desperation under her skin now. Her voice was louder, her eyes wild, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. The judge reviewed the second document, this time more carefully. "Convenient timing," he said under his breath. From the gallery, I heard a chair scrape loudly. It was Rhett. He stood up. "Stop lying, Aunt Monica." Everyone turned. "She's been twisting everything," he said, loud, clear. "She's been lying to all of us for years. I saw the way she pressured Mom." I heard the voicemails. The courtroom stirred like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. The judge banged his gavel once. "Order." Rhett sat back down, breath short, face flushed, but he didn't look away from me this time. Monica tried to recover. "He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." But it was too late. The tide had turned. Her cracks were showing, and this time, everyone saw them. The judge cleared his throat. "Both documents will be reviewed. Court is in recess until further verification is completed." As I gathered my things, I looked over at Monica one last time. She was no longer smiling. I didn't smile either. Because as the gavel struck, I realized the fight wasn't over. It was only about to get bloodier. The room hadn't moved. It was as if the gavel had frozen the air, and everyone waited, not for justice, but for confirmation of what they'd already begun to suspect. The Chief Justice sat taller in his chair now, the weight of the morning's chaos still echoing in his gaze. He turned his attention to Monica, who stood stiff and silent, her hands white-knuckled on the edge of the defense table. "Ms. Cole," he said, tone cold and clipped. "This new document your counsel submitted, do you have proof of its origin? A chain of custody? Any forensic validation to confirm its authenticity? Monica hesitated. It was the first time I'd seen her truly falter. Her mouth opened, then shut. A bead of sweat ran down her temple, catching the courtroom lights. My assistant found it, late last night, she muttered. And your assistant's sworn statement? He wasn't available this morning. The room rustled with skeptical murmurs. The judge turned to the court clerk, nodding. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from the back bench, the forensic document analyst. He looked calm, confident. We reviewed the document first thing this morning, Your Honor, he said. Multiple inconsistencies in ink aging, mismatched notary seals, and a page mismatch with the printer model used during the year it was allegedly produced. Translation? The judge asked, though the message was clear. It's fake, sir. A collective gasp rippled through the benches like a breaking wave. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Monica's jaw twitched. She shot to her feet, voice louder than the judge's now. You're all treating me like a criminal. I only wanted what was fair. I've given my life to this family. No, you gave your life to controlling it, I said, barely above a whisper. But it carried. The judge raised a hand for silence, though the room had already fallen quiet again, all eyes fixed on her. Enough, he said flatly. The court finds the forged evidence inadmissible. The original trust document presented by Delara Cole stands as valid and binding. My ears rang, but not from the noise. From the absence of it. The kind of silence that comes after a long storm breaks. Furthermore, the judge continued, Monica Cole is fined for presenting fraudulent evidence and barred from any future guardianship claims over the estate. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe. Then he looked at me. Congratulations, Your Honor. You've been vindicated. And with that phrase, the room shifted. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a return of something that had been stripped from me for years. Respect. As I gathered my things, Rhett walked quietly down from the gallery and met me at the door. He didn't say anything right away, just held out the handkerchief, creased, familiar. You don't need to hide it anymore, Mom, he said. I took it slowly, held it against my palm. I hadn't realized until that moment how tightly I'd held myself together all this time. And now, somehow, I wasn't holding on. I was letting go. We walked into the hallway, side by side. Monica trailed out behind us not long after, her face drained, her steps slower than I'd ever seen. As she passed, she muttered under her breath, You'll regret this. I didn't even flinch, because some battles aren't worth words anymore, especially when silence says more than retaliation ever could. Outside, the sky had shifted. The afternoon light had turned soft and golden, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. I stepped into it with Rhett beside me. I felt the sun on my face, not as a shield, but as a beginning. Monica had lost more than a case. She lost the narrative she'd spent years building. But I hadn't won because she gave up. I'd won because I finally stopped letting her define me. Because sometimes the harshest battles aren't fought in court. They're fought in silence and in choosing to rise again,